Hey everyone, let's dive right into this explainer. Today, we're looking at something incredibly cool, the intersection between the raw, intense physics of melting metal and the highly structured world of engineering blueprints. We're going to explore exactly how we go from generating extreme heat to communicating exact dimensional requirements across the globe. Here's our roadmap for today. We'll kick things off with the art of TIG welding, jump into types of resistance welding, and then see how we control those weld parameters. After that, we'll shift gears into the language of blueprints, and finally, decode ISO 2553 symbols. Let's get to it. Section 1. The art of TIG welding, harnessing extreme heat. So let's start with gas tungsten arc welding, commonly known as TIG. Now, TIG is widely considered the absolute hardest welding process out there in the industry. Why? Because you're literally feeding filler metal with one hand while manipulating a torch with the other. It's like rubbing your belly and patting your head, but with extreme heat. You've got to maintain this super short arc length and be incredibly careful not to accidentally touch the non-consumable tungsten electrode to the workpiece. This extreme environment uses a constant current power supply to create an arc, which literally turns gas into highly ionized plasma to melt the metal. The shielding gas, usually argon or helium, steps in to replace the air and protect that weld from atmospheric contamination. It's wild. You've got moving charged particles generating an electric current right inside a magnetic field, creating this pocket of intense, highly localized heat. And TIG gives operators unbelievable control over this plasma. They can actually use different electrical polarities depending on what they're joining. For standard steel, direct current electrode negative, or straight polarity, is the go-to. The electrode tip is usually a sharp point, focusing all that intense heat right on melting the base metal. But aluminum is a totally different beast. It has this really stubborn, tenacious oxide surface layer that straight polarity just can't punch through. So, by switching to alternating current, the rapidly fluctuating polarity basically shatters that oxide layer, giving you a beautiful, clean weld. Moving on to Section 2, Types of Resistance Welding, the Power of Joule Heating. Now, instead of using an external arc like TIG, resistance welding relies on something called Joule heating. You apply a ton of force, blast a massive current through the metals, and the natural electrical resistance of the base metals actually generates the heat needed to melt them together. It's brilliant. And this is beautifully broken down into 3 simple categories, based entirely on how that heat is concentrated. In Type A, the current flow and heat generation are focused entirely by the design of the electrodes. Think of your standard spot welding, where a pointed electrode tip forces all that current into one tiny spot. In Type B, it's the design of the workpieces themselves, like a pre-stamped bump in projection welding that localizes the heat. The electrode just fits right over it. And finally, Type C brings in an extra element, like a braze metal or a rivet, to alter or enhance the heating process. Section 3. Controlling the weld parameters, mastering the machine. All right, so we get the physics, but how on earth do we control this to get a perfect joint every single time? Well, the basic formula for Joule heating sounds pretty straightforward. Heat equals current squared times resistance times time. But out on the manufacturing floor, it's a crazy balancing act. Believe it or not, researchers have actually identified over 100, yes, 100 different parameters that can mess with the final result of a resistance weld. We're talking everything from material hardness to surface coatings, right down to inductive losses in the welding machine itself. The sheer number of variables is just staggering. So the trick is mastering the heavy hitters. Take contact resistance, for example. It's not static. It dynamically drops as temperature and pressure go up. When you apply that initial welding force, you're basically crushing the microscopic rough peaks on the metal's surface. That increases the actual contact area and drops the electrical resistance. Then, as the temperature skyrockets, surface junk burns off, the metal softens, and resistance drops even more. Though, fun fact, mild steel actually has a tiny resistance bump right around 300 degrees Celsius. Balancing all of this, the force, the time, the current, against those constantly shifting material properties, that is the true art of a welding engineer. Which brings us to a really fascinating question. We know exactly how to weld, but how do we tell a machine or a person halfway across the world exactly where and how to do it? Imagine a German engineer designing a part that's going to be fabricated in Japan. They can't rely on verbal instructions. They need a system that translates the raw physics of TIG and resistance welding into an absolute, unambiguous visual language. Section 4. The language of blueprints. Introducing ISO 2553. If the welding parameters are our instruments, then the ISO 2553 standard is the sheet music. It lets engineers everywhere play the exact same tune. This standard lays down strict rules for representing welded joints on drawings, geometry, manufacturing quality, the whole shebang. And what's really cool is that it impartially handles two different global systems for designating the arrow side on a drawing. System A, used heavily in Europe, uses a dual reference line, one solid, one dashed, to show if a weld is on the arrow side or the other side of the joint. Then you have System B, mainly used in Pacific Rim countries, which relies on a single reference line. The standard is super clear on this. You absolutely cannot mix these two systems on a single drawing. You have to pick one, ensuring totally precise global manufacturing. And finally, Section 5, decoding ISO 25553 symbols, translating the standard. Now let's actually decode these things. We're going to break down the anatomy of a welding symbol, starting from the most basic indicator up to highly complex manufacturing instructions. The absolute simplest form is the basic symbol. You use this when you just need to say, hey, weld this joint without dictating exactly how it's done. It literally just looks like a line with an arrow at one end and a split tail at the other. It's often used simply to mark locations for tack welds. And notice, there's no dual reference line here for System A yet because we aren't giving any specific details about the weld's geometry. But when you do want to give specific instructions, every complete symbol breaks down into three main parts. First, you've got the arrow line. Usually drawn at a 135-degree angle, this guy acts like a leader, pointing right at the joint. Next up is the reference line, typically parallel to the bottom edge of the drawing. Think of this as your foundation. And finally, you have the tail. That's the little V shape at the end of the reference line, and it's where you stash all the extra non-symbolic complementary info, like referencing a specific welding procedure specification, or WPS. Now, right on that reference line is where the magic happens. That's where you put your elementary symbols to dictate the exact geometry of the weld. Need a fillet weld? You pop a little triangle right on the line. What about a plug weld? That's a square with an open top. A single bevel butt weld is a vertical line joined by a diagonal one. The orientation of all these tiny shapes is strictly locked in by the standard. This means a fabricator can look at a drawing and instantly recognize exactly how to prep the joint before they even think about striking an arc. And it goes way beyond just the shape. These symbols can dictate incredibly specific cross-sectional dimensions. An engineer can call out A, which is the nominal throat thickness, basically the height of the largest triangle you could fit inside a fillet weld. Or they might ask for Z, the leg length, measuring across the fusion face. They can demand exact penetration depths and precise nominal lengths. It completely transforms a simple, abstract drawing into a robust, real-world physical structure. So, as we wrap up this explainer, I want you to look at the built environment around you. Realize that every massive steel bridge, every skyscraper, every delicate car chassis, they all began with these tiny universal symbols on a page. The flying sparks, the intense plasma, the dynamic resistance of the metals, it is all choreographed by the careful application of the ISO 25553 standard. So next time you drive over a massive bridge, ask yourself, what microscopic physical forces are holding this whole thing together, and what tiny, silent symbols on a blueprint originally sparked them into existence? Thanks for joining me on this deep dive, and keep exploring the incredible engineering all around us.